welcome everybody. Um, just give everybody a couple minutes to get settled here. We're going to do today just kind of a crash course in, obviously this is a very unorthodox year here where generally speaking, we're past 5-1. Everybody with very few outliers know exactly where they're going to school, know exactly what the um, final price point's going to be, right? Obviously, as we all know, this is not every year. So there are still a percentage of folks that are, how am I gonna how am I gonna pay this bill? How am I gonna I'm still waiting on a package, right? Or I'm just starting to appeal. So again, very unorthodox year. And however, we're going to take a peek around the corner and we are going to um, start talking about the next step, which is paying the bill, right? And kind of a couple of different things that we do here. Number one, we talk about, I'm just grabbing a link for you guys. Give me a second. Where did it go? Here we go. So before I kind of get into the subject matter for today, if anybody wants, we're doing what I expect is our very last, barring the unexpected, our very last presentation of the class 2024 families, parents, on how to appeal, understanding the award letter, how to appeal. And we're going to start to tease more of the subject matter today, which is paying the bill. So if you want to invite any of your class 2024 families, I just put that link into the chat. Like always, it'll be recorded. Everybody that registers will get a copy and all of that, like we always do. But what I'm going to do is just kind of give you a teaser today, and it will likely be in 2 weeks, maybe. Yeah, maybe it's as long as a month from now, but probably in 2 weeks we will do um, just kind of a more comprehensive presentation of this subject matter, which is really um, making sure that we have all the loan rates, repayment terms, and kind of the details sorted out. Because as you may or may not know, these things change every single year. And we just don't know yet, right? So the federal government, we've got some rumors as to what their rates are. It's not pretty. And they'll announce those in the next couple of weeks, and then it'll be kind of a trickle down effect where the states will announce their programs, and then we'll have the private lenders, your SoFi, Sallie Mae, College Abs of the world. But we don't have those yet, so we're just a little bit early at this stage. So oh, and let me grab the other link here. As always, if you're kind of new to us and myself, my name is Matt Carpenter. I'm the founder at College Aid Pro, and we work with about, now we just hit 3,000 high schools across the country, and we're kind of provide the education for their community in terms of scholarships, financial aid, everything in between. And then we have a software that we call, I think the easiest way to understand it is kind of like the Score, Naviance, or Zello, SchoolLinks, whatever you use in your high school. We are that of financial aid and scholarships. That is what we do. That is the problem that we solve together with you all on the front lines here. So if you don't partner with us yet, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing this other link to put in the chat. You can grab some time on my calendar. I can learn a little bit more about your school. You can learn a little bit more about us and see if, there's anything we could do to support your community beyond whatever it is that you're doing currently. So on to the task at hand here. Let me just walk you through a quick deck. And as always, please fire away with questions. It does not have to be, relevant to the subject matter here. Any questions that are stumping you guys at the moment, please, please fire at will here. And put those in the Q&A for me as opposed to the chat if you wouldn't mind, if you do have questions. Okay, so here's us at College Aid Pro. You know, and see that's our software, but just kind of quickly timeline. Obviously, this year's a little bit wonky, but we don't see too many meaningful changes coming in terms of the loans and the billing and all that stuff yet, right? Obviously, May 1st deadlines at a ton of schools got pushed back. Things are still being sorted out, which is, you know, atypical, but this stuff should be about the same where most schools send out their bills for the fall semester early to the middle of July, due early to the middle of August. Like everything, every school is different, right? So there's exceptions on either side of that, but 80% of schools are going to fall somewhere in there. And then same deal when they talk about second semester, it happens, you know, right towards the end of the year. Educational loans a lot different than if you're applying for a home equity line of credit or a refi or anything like that. These things process really fast. The plus loan, the federal loans, they tell you instantaneously you're in or out. Where most of the other loans, they're going to give you notifications within 24 hours up to 72 hours, and then usually the college is not far behind. Our general talk track for families is that whatever, now's the time to start kind of researching and thinking about what loans make sense for your family. But we set this kind of, I don't know, false deadline of mid-July where it probably makes sense to choose your option by then so you can, you know, worry about execution in plenty of time before that first bill's due, and you're not worried about late charges or unexpected hiccups, anything like that. And then most of these colleges, right, the majority of colleges have payment plans, which we'll spend a little bit more time talking about. But a lot of these, they start earlier. They start there's some exceptions, but most of the early ones start June 1st, right? So we're talking about 3 weeks away where we're making some of our first payment plans towards colleges. Now you can start later, and most people do, but then that first payment, they want you to go back retroactively and make it a bigger payment in order to catch up for any payments that you may have missed. We'll just talk quickly about, look at, you know, cash is king, right? Now's a great time in kind of your financial life, I guess, right? This is one of, I always kind of articulate it like when we look at our lives, there's usually a couple like major, you know, I don't know, benchmarks, right? Or milestones that maybe give us an excuse to hit the pause button and stare at our situation, right? So I think of it as like, um, you get married, right? You maybe save up to buy your first home, maybe you start a family. And then for a lot of people, the next one is maybe we're sending our kids to college and then we're retiring. Like, you know, there's a relatively short list of some of those like major milestones in our life. And this is a great one to just be like, all right, let me do kind of some self inventory here because, and I like this graphic because I think it's fairly powerful because if we can save our $100 a month, that's $5,000 less than we have to borrow for college, right? And so again, if I figure out, hey, you know what, I'm paying for these 2 old gym memberships I'm not using, and you know, hey, wait a minute, now I don't have to feed my kid because they're off to college. There's $100 a month. I'm gonna pay it on a payment plan directly to the college. There's $5,000 that we don't have to borrow when we do it $100 a month over the course of 4 years. Of course, that's 4,800, but hopefully you get the point here. So the first thing we'll just spend a couple minutes talking about is just like, well, before we get to borrowing, is there anything we can do to minimize the amount we can borrow, right? So again, clean out your financial junk drawer. Now is a great time again to do that exercise we should all do. Again, I swear one of these years I'm going to take my own advice and, you know, do it myself and say, you know, hey, do we cut the cable cord? Do we, you know, again, what aren't we using? And I think that can be, hi, Anne-Marie. Did you not mean to come on? You look concerned. Well, that was Anne Marie. Everybody meet Anne Marie. Some of you have had the pleasure of meeting her. Hopefully more of you do. She's our high school coordinator. So that was a sneak preview for Anne Marie. Okay, and then again, kind of same concept here. What can we do to reduce the amount we borrow? And the first one is just kind of look at your own house, right? You're not feeding your own kid anymore. Can that be redistributed towards college, right? We can set up these payment plans. There's a nominal fee to do that. There's no interest. Usually they're 10-month schedules, cost 60 to 75 bucks. And I think an important point here that again is not common knowledge in my experience is that you don't have to pay the entire amount for college. So in other words, let's say a family owes $40,000 over the course of the year to pay for college, right? And they say, well, we can't do the payment plan because we can't do $4,000 a month, right? Via this 10-month payment schedule. Zero chance. So we can't do the payment plan. Well, now a very common and oftentimes a smart strategy is that you chop this up a couple different ways. You say, okay, you know what? We got $5,000 we can put towards savings. We can do $1,000 a month via monthly cash flow. Okay, so that now there's 15,000, and now we have, in that example, what's that leave us with? $25,000 left that we have to borrow, right? So it totally makes sense to chop it up. Maybe sometimes some savings out of pocket, sometimes it's the payment plan, and then the delta that we might have to borrow. So that's again is some of the messaging that we talk about up front. When we're educating families, is it's like, okay, here's the timeline. Let's just quickly talk about and hopefully get your wheels turning on some ways to reduce the amount you have to borrow, because even if it sounds really small, $100 a month, what impact does that have? That's $5,000 less somebody has to borrow for college, right? Next thing we'll focus on, and I'll again kind of at least do the Cliff Notes here, is when to use what resources. So again, some families do have resources, right? Obviously to varying degrees, but there's a strategy in terms of when should we use what. And it always makes sense. Your famous last words always, but generally speaking, it makes sense to use student resources first. So if the students have custodial accounts, UGMAs or UTMAs, or any savings that is specifically earmarked for college, those it makes sense to use first, and kind of 1A, 1B, followed by your traditional educational savings vehicles, which are 529s, prepaid tuition plans, ESAs, are kind of just like synonyms, almost interchangeable terms for these vehicles. But that is where we're going to draw from next, right? And then we get into stuff like grandparents or other funds that might be earmarked for school. I mean, the 529s can get a little bit complex in terms of like how to disperse these the right way to make sure that you don't accidentally make some tax mistakes, right? Because the big benefit of 529, so long as the money's used for college, it's not taxed, right? But where most colleges bill by semester, sometimes this can trip up the IRS, and a family just accidentally. So say, for example, they have to pay $20,000 and they're going to use it all for their 529, but they only paid 10,000 in this calendar year, and they paid the other 10,000 in the next calendar year, right? The IRS can say, well, only 10,000 of this went to college in this tax year. And sometimes it trips up that system, and they send you a scary letter, right? To say, hey, you didn't use 10,000 of it. And there's pretty significant penalties for this, right? So they send a scary letter. So you got to have just a paper trail that shows that money, did go to college, right? A nice thing with grandparent contributions, this used to be another kind of layer of complexity. We probably won't even address it this year since it's no longer a thing. But the long and the short of it was that the timing of when grandparents contributed towards college, specifically via 529, used to matter because it could negatively impact financial aid eligibility in subsequent years. That's no longer the case. So again, it's just the talk track is less important when it comes to that piece. This is one where we're always kind of wavering on how much is too little versus what becomes overwhelm. And how much is too much information, how detailed, right? Because the thing to consider here is that you can get these really good tax breaks when you have a kid in college, right? Up to $2,500. If the family's household income is below 180,000, right? It starts to get phased out at 160,000. But again, there sometimes you can miss out on this if you use all of your 529 plan to pay for college. So again, I'm sure I'm losing some people here. I'll do my best to give you a quick example. Let's say I'm a family that I owe $30,000 for college in the year. I have it in my 529. Okay. So I use all that 529 money to pay for college. I would lose that $2,500 tax credit, right? Dollar for dollar tax credit. Okay. The IRS, if you have a 529, and again, it's one of these stupid little rules that basically disqualifies a lot of these people from getting this tax break, but $4,000 needs to come from another source. So in that example, if I have a family that's I'm working with that has all the 529 covered, that makes less than $160,000 a year, or sorry, has all the bill covered via the 529, we would advise them take 26,000 from the 529, figure out $4,000 from somewhere else, payment plan, whatever, to make sure that you take advantage of that $2,500, right? So again, a wonky, kind of confusing little thing, and depending on the audience, it will vary how much we're talking about, like 529 plans in general. We partner with a lot of Title I schools, so we'll probably spend no time talking about 529s and grandparent distributions. We also partner with a ton of independent schools that are on the opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum, where that is more of a, frequent questions, right? And then of course, most schools that we work with, they're somewhere in between. So we're splitting the difference there and trying to talk to everyone that is, might show up at a given session here, right? So here's just kind of some general tips, right? There is no one size fits all. Okay, it's kind of like a lot of things in advice around college, right? Admissions, financial aid, every college is different, every family's different, every student's different. Same thing with borrowing, right? It's very common that I can meet with 3 different families, and the best recommendation for the first one is a PLUS loan, the second one is Sallie Mae, and the third one should, borrow against their life insurance policy, right? It all changes, okay? And ultimately, it's determined by their family's criteria. And I'm going to talk you through how we help families have the conversation kind of with themselves to lead them down the path of, okay, this is probably the right option or options for our family. Yeah, and that's kind of point number 3 there. And then lastly, how much is too much to borrow? Specifically for the student, we have some metrics around that as well. And, this is kind of where we anchor. And without getting too far into the weeds in terms of what data we use to support it, I think the simplest way to understand it is that, we want to have a decent idea. Things change, majors change, transfers happen, right? But let's have a decent high-level idea about what we can expect a student to make after graduation, right? Based on their discipline. And over the course of 4 years, we don't want to borrow more than that, right? So if I have a student that wants to go be an elementary school teacher, that's amazing. But I don't want them to borrow more than 43,000, because when they get above that, or again, over the course of 4 years, when they get above that, now the math starts to not work in our favor in terms of what their first monthly payment is going to be and their take-home pay. Versus if we have someone that wants to go major in computer science, they can borrow $70,000 and the math is still in our favor. Right. So this is obviously not an exact science, but I think it is helpful to anchor to something. Yeah, and this is not a stupid question. The question is, but how can students borrow after they take the federal direct student loan, right? What used to be called the Stafford loan. What options do they have? And look at the short answer is basically none, unless they have a cosigner. Okay, so anything after the federal direct student loan, which caps at $5,500 freshman year of college, the students could borrow the entire thing, right? Obviously, we work with some families and they say, I put myself through college, my kid's going to put themselves through college. Okay, great. But Anything that after that 5,500, somebody's got to co-sign on that. Somebody with established credit. Okay, they can be deferred, so nobody has to make a payment on those, student or anybody, until 6 months after graduation, or if they go to grad school 6 months after that. There's some other, or if they go into the Peace Corps, they're deferred. Job Corps, or what is it, Teach America, right? They can be deferred until after that. But somebody's got to co-sign. The only kind of exception there is if a parent applies for a PLUS loan and they're denied, then the student becomes eligible to borrow $4,000 more via that federal direct loan. So that's kind of the only path where they could borrow more than that 5,500 without a cosigner. And again, $4,000 is helpful, but a lot of these families are like, now that's still a drop in the bucket compared to what they might have to come up with. But those can be some of the most challenging situations, which is why we want parents thinking about some of that stuff now. Yeah, and it's really true. It's really true in terms of the comment here of like, so if there's no cosigner after that federal direct student loan, you know, that's it's just a freaking harsh reality, right? And the best thing that I can say is go in and talk face to face with the financial aid counselors to say, here's where we're at, and see what can be done. But again, there's just some horrible scenarios. So yeah, and a comment here that as a school counselor, I don't recommend a student take out any private loans above and beyond the federal direct student loans. That's where all the horror story comes out from crippling student debt. I'd push back on that a little, right? Like I said in that last slide, if a family can be so lucky, I say this every day, right? And again, I work with the whole spectrum of families. If your kid graduates with $27,000 in debt via a federal direct student loan, that's a grand slam home run and amazing end result. And you should be thrilled. Okay. That's not the reality for a number of families. In order to make college happen, maybe even at an in-state state school, the kids are going to have to borrow more than that. And again, that's okay. The data and math supports that up to a certain threshold. The horror stories happen, and you know, once we start borrowing, again, where the horror stories happen, where the math starts to not make sense, is if somebody that's again on a career path to go be an elementary school teacher, and then they take out $76,000 or more, right, or really anything above this 43,000, call it. That's when we're in trouble, and we're really starting our lives behind the financial eight ball. But I wouldn't have as hard of a cutoff as the $27,000 via the federal direct student loans, right? But I'm with you kind of in principle. Okay, so quickly, high level overview, types of loans, right? We have our federal direct student loan, we have our direct loan for parents, right? The PLUS loan, we have the whole private student sector. There are some state programs. Some colleges have their own loan programs, and then what we call just kind of alternative loan options, tapping into home equity, 401k, you know, family loans, right? And life insurance here. We'll recommend to everybody. Now, these rates are going to change and they're not going to go in the direction we'd like them to. And we'll have this updated. We recommend that everybody take the federal direct student loan for one of two reasons, right? If you need to borrow anything, this is the best place to start. You're not going to have a better option, full stop. Okay. If you don't need your kids to borrow, like I said, we work with a lot of affluent families. They don't need their kids to borrow. They don't want their kids to borrow. So why would we still recommend that they do so? Well, they can take out this loan each year, pay it off instantaneously, and then the kids graduate with established credit, i.e. the rich get richer. But it's a great perk. And it's just a smart strategy, and parents will love you for recommending that because it is not a known thing. And these are just, again, some of the reasons why it makes sense. And then the hows, how do I actually execute my federal student loan, right? Here's how I log in. We got to do loan counseling. We got to complete the loan agreement, kind of we'll walk them through the steps of actually having that loan change hands between the federal government and the relevant colleges there. And then we'll walk them through again each of the options. So here's the PLUS loans, right? Just kind of some FYIs here. Fixed interest rates, high origination fee, 4% origination fee. Usually, again, we don't know next year's, it'll be right around there again. So 4% is coming off the top. We think the rate is going to be 8.5% this year. That is off the record. But you know, and it's only in the parent's name. Sometimes for some families, this is their only option because it's the only one they'll qualify for because of their credit. It's the most lenient by far. It's their deal between themselves and the federal government. There's some meaningful advantages there because the federal government is by far the most lenient lender, not just in terms of being eligible for the loan, but in terms of flexibility, repayment terms, etc. You are not working with a private company that is a Sallie Mae, that is a SoFi, that is a you know, you call a Jab, whatever, you name it. You know, it's kind of a morbid tidbit here, but this is one of the few loans where the loan dies with the lender, right? So God forbid you have a parent or grandparent taking out this plus loan that passes away, that loan is forgiven. Again, the student is not attached to this loan at all, at least not formally. Okay, if the student is, you know, responsible for any type of repayment with this loan, it's on a handshake agreement with parent or parents, right? Which happens sometimes. It makes sense sometimes for some families, but that is not formal. Whereas again, if you have your state loan, you have your Sallie Mae, you have your whatever, the students can be on there as a formally attached to that loan too. So if you have one of those, God forbid, situations, that loan will be completely inherited by the student or you know, kind of vice versa. Okay. Some states have programs, right? And you know, here's just a couple examples. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Iowa. The reason why we flag those is that they are the only 3 states in the country that anybody can borrow through, regardless of where you live, regardless of where you go to school. So most state programs, for example, Vermont has a great one, right? In order for me to use VSAC, that's the name of Vermont's borrowing program, I either have to be a resident of Vermont or my kid has to go to UVM or St. Michael's or Middlebury or whatever, right? So I can be a Texas resident, but my kid's got to go to school in Vermont for me to take advantage of that program. The exceptions are Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Iowa. I can live in Los Angeles and my kid can go to UCLA. I can borrow through Rhode Island's program, and guess what? I just might, because a lot of the features are better than the federal government, for example. Some of them are better than the private student loan sector. So this is just something that, again, in my experience, especially if you don't live in these states, you know, Massachusetts does a pretty good job advertising, where a lot of Mass residents, they spend a ton of money on that, obviously, but a lot of Mass residents kind of know about the organization that we have here. They're ultimately backed by Fidelity, so they get the bucks to do that. But you know, again, it can be a great recommendation to just say for parents, hey, FYI, there's more out there than the plus loan and Sallie Mae, and you know, again, you can be saving them a meaningful amount of money in some cases. Okay. Private student loans, this is what we think of as, and I should say state programs are different from the plus loans, and that parents and students are both formally attached to those in the same way that, you know, that it works in the private student loan market, right? When would we, you know, the private student loans are the most I guess get the worst rap, I would say, right? Because again, these are private companies and they will come after you if you're not paying. Like, you hear the horror stories, right? They're, well, I think, largely rooted in truth, right? And there's not going to be any forgiveness with private. I mean, hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't see a future in which private companies are going to forgive loans, right? I don't think that business model is sustainable. And SoFi just paid a couple $2 billion for a football stadium in Los Angeles, so they're going to recoup that. But for some families, these loans make the most sense, right? If you have a really robust application, if you have really strong credit, just about all these loans have no origination fees. If you have a very competitive application, you're likely to get the lowest rate you're going to find maybe even lower than the state programs, and and probably certainly lower than the plus loan. So you get less flexibility. But if I'm a parent that's like, I don't care about any other features aside from the rate and how much this loan's ultimately going to cost me, and I have really good credit, this is probably their solution, right? We're going to go shopping in this private market, and I'll show you kind of how we do that within our platform, or maybe now is a good time to do that. But for those, where are we now? Sorry, let me stop sharing for a second so I can get my bearings. Okay, so most of you are familiar with our platform, right? But we, you know, and actually, some one last thing that we'll talk to them about tonight is like, don't even if we're talking about borrowing, just make sure that you got a good deal, right? At least upload your financial aid award letter. Let us evaluate it. The platform will tell you, did you get a fair deal from Boston College, NYU, et cetera? Do you have room to appeal still? So do that first, because again, you want to talk about ways to reduce your borrowing. Use, use the technology to do that. But then within here, we've got a lot of great resources in terms of helping families decide what loan is best for them. And there's kind of a logic tree to help them figure that out. But then within the private student loan market for families that it does make sense to go there. Not all colleges accept all loans. So if I'm going to Syracuse, I can put that in here wherever my kid's going. Did I spell it right? I'm just being slow. Oh, there we go. Okay. Then it will tell me, okay, here's what schools, in theory. Okay, here's what loans that Syracuse works with, or whatever school you put in there, and they can kind of, again, the idea is compare side by side and do some of their homework and whatever, make a decision, based on that. Again, if that's even the kind of type of loan that they should be, where they should be fishing, right? That's the important part first, is like, where should we even be fishing? And then we get into our alternative loans. This year is kind of like last year, 2 years ago, and previously. This would be the best recommendation for some families. Look at, you got money sitting in your walls, go grab it at 2.5%, 3%, as opposed to paying the federal government, 8%. Meaningful difference, right? Not anymore, right? So it's incredibly rare that we made those recommendations last year. This year is going to be the same. It's just a different market. But the point of this kind of presentation is to help families understand, here's all of the options that are on your table. So pros and cons of each, and then help them kind of get to a place where they feel like, all right, this is probably the best place for us. Yeah, 401k, one of the biggest mistakes that people can make, and this is something we'll be firm on, our recommendation is not to pull money out of your 401k. Do not take a distribution for all sorts of reasons, and we'll talk about those. We will talk about those, but sometimes if you can borrow against your 401k, you can do that at a really competitive rate. That might make sense, but we do not want people pulling money out of retirement. And again, we'll talk about all of the whys, unless it's a Roth IRA, which we'll talk about. That's a little bit different and a unique vehicle in that sense, in where it's okay. There's some benefits to withdrawing from that, but otherwise we don't want that happening. We'll spend a minute just on family loans and some kind of FYIs around that. And then again, life insurance, kind of if you're going to leverage a vehicle there, how often usually it makes sense to borrow against it as opposed to taking a withdrawal for most families. So this part of the kind of end of our presentation, how we'll bring this together, is to just talk about how to help families determine the most important criteria for them, right? Like let's go through these exercises so you can start to think about some of these things that you probably haven't been thinking about yet, right? Everybody, when they think of loans, I think they just think interest rates. I'm going to go choose the lowest interest rate and I'm going to take that loan. Okay, that's great, but let's try to quantify, how important that is, right? versus some of these other things we want to be thinking about. Who should be on the loan and for how long, right? Some parents say, look, at my kids have to be on this loan. That's a very important part for our family dynamic. I don't want it to be a handshake agreement. Well, okay, well then we're not there. That takes the plus loan off the table, right? And kind of by process of elimination, we can start to think about that. So maybe even if the rate that I get in the private student loan market is higher than the plus loan, but that's going to kind of overrule, the fact that my kid's not on the plus loan. That's more important to me. So these are some of the things, the conversations that families need to start thinking about and having with one another, right? How much do I care about consumer protection and flexibility, right? So in other words, okay, maybe I can get the best rate through, Sallie Mae, but if something happens in the future, come hell or high water, they're coming after me, right? If I lose a job, if we have an unexpected situation, I'm going to have way less flexibility with them than I am with, for example, the federal government, right? Where they're very flexible. They're going to let me pause payments. They're going to let me set up an income-based repayment plan, right? I'm going to have all this flexibility. Maybe it's worth, in my opinion, again, I'm not saying me, but if I'm a family thinking about this, I might go, well, even if the interest rate is a percentage point more competitive at Sallie Mae, I might use the plus loan because I really value that flexibility. I'm in sales or I'm in a tumultuous market, for my job, or I work at a startup and whatever. My future is less kind of certain than a steady Eddie, job. I might put a premium. I might say it's worth paying a little bit more for that loan because of this flexibility that's built into it. Another way to look at that is like I pay a premium for insurance, right? Yes, I pay more to take out the direct plus loan than I could through the state's program, but I look at that as an insurance premium. So if a what if happens, I know I get a lot of flexibility in there, right? And then the last one is just, again, when we talk about home equity, which will be very little focus this year, it's kind of philosophical question some families have. They kind of feel like, even if that's the best option, I'm not tapping my home to pay for college, which I understand, but I want to challenge people to think about when it makes sense, right? If it's the best option. So that's kind of the long and short of it. Again, the idea is to hopefully have it be like all our presentations, interactive, get parents asking questions. We will be doing this presentation over the coming weeks, right, to our audiences. So if you think it's something that'd be valuable to your audience, please let us know. We will make sure that we get you on the books. Like always, you can write into Anne Marie at counselor@collegeaidpro.com. That's and again, this is your dedicated email too, guys. So for those of you that are new with us, that's just for school counselors. We are checking that every day. We're very responsive. We got a couple sets of eyeballs on that thing. And the idea is that any challenges you're facing that are anywhere in our ecosystem at all, please let us be a resource for you, right? We're trying to be that backstop for school counselors that are like, I don't know where to go for this information. We want to be, come to us for your answers, or send your parents to us, whatever's most helpful for you all. Yeah, but I'll stick around for any kind of lingering questions. Again, it doesn't have to be related to this. It could be related to, anything that's a pain point for you all at the moment. And